Now hopefully today as I go from screen to screen, the screen itself won't disappear. Alright, if it does, we'll just have to deal with it, okay? So this is what we created before. You should all have this now. So this was the home page. This was the about page. And this was the contact page. Okay? And when we shrunk it down, it still looked pretty good. So here was the home page. Here was the about page. And here was the contact page. And again, when we did this, we used a combination of floats and just positioning, etc. to do what we did. Questions on that? All right. So, if you look up on the screen, please, everybody, this is what we're going to do today. All right. So, I changed the picture, so you know, I kind of like this. There's a reason I use these colors, and I'll go through it in just a minute. But it's a one-page site now, so it's a SPA, or a single-page application. And again, it's not fantastic, but that's what it looks like. And when we shrink it down now, that I didn't have time to really fix, because I should have moved that down, but I didn't. Like I said, it could be better. But you'll see, it doesn't look terrible right now as it is. All right? So, that's where we were. What I was originally going to do, you've got the HTML. I'm sorry, you'll have it in a minute. Okay? And what I was going to originally do was just have us together go and write the style.css and the mobile, but the mobile's only about 20 lines. Okay? And I was going to have us write the utility stuff, because originally it looks like this, which is not very good. I think you'd all agree. All right, so I said, you know what? No, just forget that. So let me get rid of this and this. So I sent you as an email this morning, I sent you the utility.css file and the mobile.css file. So it looks a little better now when you look on the screen here. You know, it's looking, you know, but that picture is still humongous. And the other one is, and the form looks terrible, but it's getting there. All right. So again, this is what we want. All right. Now, before we go through what I did, a couple things to mention to you. All right. You'll notice here that I used this color blue. There actually is a significance to this, and I'm going to explain it in just a minute. And I used this color green. There's a significance to that. What's the significance? Well, the significance is, in a few weeks, we're going to be going over a CSS framework called Bootstrap. And when we do, Bootstrap, for their primary color, uses that blue. For their success color, they use that green. I didn't have to use these colors. I didn't have to use those hex values, but that's why I did it. So I went out and literally just, this is colorswall.com palette 3, and it shows the different colors that they use. So I grabbed this one, and I grabbed this one. Okay, that's the only thing I wanted to mention to you. It's not that big a thing one way or the other. All right, so we're going to get to this in just 1 second. So this is what I did. And I realize that might be a little hard for you to see. I'm going to, you know, regardless, but I don't think I can make this any bigger. Well, I guess I can a little bit. So what did we do? Well, I started out with Git Status, because I had a brand new folder where I put my stuff, but I didn't have any Git in it yet. So you should know this by now, that when you do a Git Status and there's no Git.git folder, you get a fatal error. Basically, it says you don't have a repository. So what did I do? I made one with Git init. All right. And with a Git init, it says it initialized the empty repository. And again, what that did was that put that .git file in there. If for some reason you're not seeing that .git file on your screen, if you're not, you'll have to Google, or I can find it for you. You know, there's a Windows listing that says show hidden files, because anything that starts with a dot is technically a hidden file. So we want to show all the hidden files. And if yours isn't showing that .git folder, you don't have that turned on. You just have to go and click a couple things in Windows to do it. I don't remember what it is, right? Tell you right now. All right. So then I did my git add dot. All right. After I did the git add dot, I did the git status. So you can see what's in here. I'm not going to go over any of it. You can see it all. This is the project that we're going to be working on right now, the Flexbox. So if you notice, I've got a client 1, client 2. That's those little pictures. Well, now they're big. Of those 2 people. All right. I've got founder, and you know what that is. That's the woman who founded it. I've got Mansion 02 because I kept going back and forth between 2 different pictures. The other picture actually probably looked better with the text background, but I didn't like the picture of the house very much. I like this picture. All right? So that's why it's showcase 2. And the other one is showcase 22. So the other one's still in there. If you want to look at it yourself, you can change pictures. And then there's our index file. So remember, what this does when I say git status like this, all right, and then I do the git space add space dot, that puts those files into what's called the staging area. And if they're in the staging area, it means they're ready to be committed. Now, we've been using git space add space dot, but it's possible you don't want to go and commit every file that you have. Maybe there's just one file that changed, and you know that. So you can say git space add space and just list that one file. Or you can list multiple files where there's just a blank space between them, if you want to do that. In addition, when we go in, because we're going to do this a little bit later, there is a file that you can create that's called .gitignore. And in that file, you'd put anything in there that basically you wouldn't want to be sharing with other people. Does all that make sense? All right. So I did that, and then I did my git commit. Now, I went over first to GitHub, and on GitHub, I made a project called WeSoM-Flexbox. Why? Because that's the same name as my folder's name. All right? You know that now. So this is the URL for it. Show you that one later. Yeah, it's going to be way, oh, not too big. So that's where it is. You know by now, or hopefully you do, that my path for GitHub is JP Scott Rankin. Okay, so let's see, I'll make it a little bigger. Is that too big? Yeah, it is. All right, so it's basically it's the github.com/JP Scott Rankin /WeSoM, etc. We'll look at it again in just a couple minutes. All right, so after I did that, then I did go and I committed. Git space commit space, because you should be committing on a regular basis. And I put in there initial WeSoM Flexbox website commit, no CSS files included, because again at first I didn't give them to you. All right, so that's all the stuff that basically got committed. Then I did my git space remote space -v, and literally it came up with nothing. Why? Because I had not linked this yet to my GitHub repository out on github.com. So that was this line right here. Git space remote space add space origin space, then that path. All right? Then I did my git push origin master. All right, and after I did all that, then I can come back to here, refresh, and now it's got that. Now it looks very small because the only thing that I've got in there right now, I guess I don't even have a CSS folder. All right. Any questions on that? All right. One thing I wanted to mention to you, this is something you don't have to write it down necessarily, but you might want to commit it to memory or write it down. I talked to you before about these content delivery networks. There is actually a website called CDN.js, Content Delivery Network, JavaScript, cdnjs.com. And if you notice, they have 3,924 different libraries you can link to. So for instance, if I know I want to come in here and I'm going to come right in here where it says search, and I'm going to say Bootstrap 4. I want to link there. Well, then notice it's got a whole bunch of bootstrap links. Sometimes it's faster to go to one site and grab every content delivery network file you want when you know they're there. Okay? When we get to Bootstrap, it's even simpler than this. I'll hold off on that until we get there. But just so you know that exists. So again, you say, well, geez, I forgot where Font08 was. There it is. All right, and you can see, I would say it'd be one of these two that you'd probably end up using. And when you look, 64,000 people have used this one, 839. I'd probably use the one that had 64,000. Right? Now again, not that you have to do that. All right. What I decided to do with this particular example was to use a different font and to use a font that's available in Google Fonts. All right? Why am I telling you this? Because if you go out to fonts.google.com, I mentioned this to you the other day, there are 1,003 different fonts that you can choose. And one that I've used before, it's not that it's fantastic, but I know that it's reputable and I know that it works just fine, is one that's called Roboto. R-O-B-O-T-O. And there it is. I kind of like the way it looks. You may agree, you may disagree. All right? If you don't, another one that's real popular is like Open Sans, and there's a lot of them. I would say, again, I wouldn't go and try to find one in here that is real dark. All right? But, just because it doesn't always come off nice on the screen, and if everything's real dark, it takes away from the message. That's all. All right, so let's say that I wanted to do this, and I want this Roboto that's right here. Everybody with me? So I'm just going to click on there. And it says, okay, basically, what do you want to do? So these are the things that are available. Now, one thing I've never mentioned to you, I've never really talked about, we've looked at this command before. You may not think we have. Yes, we have. We've looked at font, weight, bold. All right? And that does just what you think it does. It's going to bold that text. But when you bold, you can actually use numbers instead of bold. You can use the numbers 100 through 900, where 100 is the faintest type of bold, and 900 is the darkest type of bold. All right? And sometimes you might want to do that to play with it. All right, maybe you want some stuff to literally be darker than other stuff. I don't know. It depends on the site, what you're trying to do, etc. So I could just go and grab whichever one of these I want, and I can grab as many as I want, all right, by just clicking the plus sign there. Does that make sense? All right, if I want to download all of them, which is what I want to do in this case, I click where it says Download Family. All right, and, well, that wasn't what I thought would happen. Styles. Well, let's do this. I'm just going to grab. I'll just grab. There's another one. Yeah, that looks good. Yeah, that looks good. So I'm going to grab those. All right. So this is what I want. See where it says embed? All right. I click right here. Now, there are two different ways that you can put style sheets in, basically into your program. The first is the one we're used to. Link, href equals all this good stuff right here. And you can do that, and it works just fine. That's the way that most of us are used to doing things. As far as I know, that's the recommended way of doing things. But there's another way that you can do it. And notice it says here link. There's another thing here that says import. And if you choose import, then you can put in a style tag right here. You can put that, if you're going to just put it like into an individual page or something, you can do that too. All right. So what's the advantage? What's the disadvantage of doing that? Well, like I said, let me get rid of that. And what I did was I went and grabbed this. If you don't know about this site already, you should get used to when you Google something and you find a hit on StackOverflow.com, that's a really good place to go. You can actually create an account on StackOverflow.com. You can ask questions on StackOverflow.com. You can add. So if you know the answer to a question, you can try to answer questions on StackOverflow.com. Be leery of one thing if you decide to do that. These are professionals, and if you ask a stupid question, in their opinion, they're going to write, "That's really a stupid question." You're going to see stuff like that, if not worse. You typically don't see cuss words or anything like that. But I believe it. I put a question out there once, and somebody said, "This is the wrong forum for this question. It's a stupid question. Why are you even asking it?" I didn't think it was a stupid question, but evidently they did. All right? And a lot of times what's going to happen too is if you put a question out there and you really want, you're like, "Hey, I'm working on this. I'm trying to do this. I did it out of a book," etc., etc. Then what will happen is you should add your code and put your code in there too. All right? And then what will happen is people will start answering it. And one of these answers will get a check mark, which means it's the one most people would recommend that you use for the answer. But you can look up virtually anything on here. All right? And again, as long as I'm saying this stuff, if you don't know this already, I know Angie does, and maybe the rest of you do too. I don't know. But you don't have to do it this minute, but you should go out to LinkedIn.com. And if you don't have out there, if you don't already have an account set up, which it's free, you should. LinkedIn, for lack of better words, is Facebook for professionals. All right, and that's not really fair to LinkedIn because it's more than that. All right, and if you want to link and you want to, it's not a friend, but if you want to, ask that me in there, fine, and if you don't, that's fine too. And you put in there typically stuff like this. All right, so let's see, where are we? Add profile section more. So there is experience. It's kind of like a mini resume. But what happens is when you go out and start applying for jobs, quite often the first thing an HR person is going to do, not so much an IT manager, but if your resume goes to an HR person, they're going to look and see if you're out there on LinkedIn. All right. Again, you don't have to do it, but I would suggest that you do it. All right. So again, if you want to figure out some more or see some more on the difference between importing and linking, you can go out to LinkedIn. There's plenty of other sites you can go to also. All right. Just so you know, this is what we're going to be going to in a few weeks. This is Bootstrap, and it's literally getbootstrap.com. That's what it is. It used to be called Twitter Bootstrap because this kind of is a supercharged CSS, for lack of better words. And it was created from two guys from Bootstrap. All right. Since then, I don't know if they broke away from Twitter or what, but it's just called Bootstrap. And actually, we're going to be using probably this version 4.5. Version 5, which is the newest, it's in beta mode right now, which means it's being tested. All right. But again, if you're interested, you can take a look at that. All right. One more thing, and then we're going to get started, and that is I found this online today, just so you know. So if you're still struggling with Flexbox, you might want to go out to here. It's free. There's 12 lessons. It's literally 49 minutes long. So it's scrimba.com/learn/Flexbox. I found it this morning, so I haven't looked at any of it. All right. But again, if you are still struggling, because when you take the test, not tomorrow's, but next Monday's, it's on just basically on Chapter 9. So it's on Flexbox. And again, one of the things you were supposed to do for your homework for Chapter 9 was to go through Mr. Gudmisted's lectures or videos on Flexbox. Okay? So like I said, when you look here, 13 interactive screencasts, 49 minutes. So notice, 2 minutes, 2 minutes, 1 minute, 2 minutes, etc. It's not like these things are real long. I will tell you, I've looked at some of Scrimba's stuff online before. I don't know with this guy. They do seem to hire a lot of people who have accents. That's totally fine. Sometimes they're a little hard to understand. And I don't say that to belittle them. They're unbelievably talented people. All right? But just so you know that ahead of time. All right. So, that said, let's get going. So what I'd like you to do is, again, go out to this. You know, I made this public. So go out where I've got this, and you can either clone it or you can click on code and go down to download zip. But I'd like everybody to have this right now. I'll give you a couple minutes to do that. All right? And again, if you have a hard time reading, because it's kind of small. Whoops. That's probably big enough. All right. What that will give you is the index file that we're going to use today. Rather than having you type in a ton of HTML, all right, I just gave you that. It's got the images in there, all right? And once you have done that, so let's just assume you've got that done. Then go out to your mail, all right? And in your mail, you got this sent to you today. Again, I wish I would have just put this in there originally. I didn't. So I sent to all of you a zip file or a zip folder called CSS files. Change the name of it to just CSS. Unzip it and move that out to where you just added the code. So you're going to have everything available to you right now, with the exception of we're going to look at together, we're going to look at the style.css file. Does everything I just said to you make sense? All right. So again, yours will be called CSS files. I didn't realize I didn't have the CSS folder, otherwise I would have just called this CSS. So when you get done, what you will ideally have on your screen is you will have a folder that's called WeSoM Flex. In that folder, you will have Git, you will have CSS, you might not have a Git, but that's okay. You will have CSS, you will have image. The original, I think I pulled that out. That was the original one that we had done. But because does it make sense to you? I reused a lot of the code from the first one. So why rewrite that? All right. Normally about 6 o'clock, I set the laptop up on the table, and usually around 9 to 10, that's when I turn it off. You know, and my wife, I set it up early yesterday, and she said, oh, geez, it's going to be a long night, huh? Well, by 8 o'clock, I just turned it off. That was enough. All right? So again, this is the folder that you have. You do not yet have the styles.css. But in your project, if you use GitHub and then you bring in the CSS thing I gave you, you'll have everything but styles.css. Okay? All right, so I'm going to bring a few things up on the screen then right now. And yeah, I'm even using, well, not that. I don't want Visual Studio. I want Visual Studio Code. All right, so I've got Visual Studio Code up here. All right. Now, let's start kind of in a weird way, and that is by looking at the mobile stuff. So we're almost doing a mobile first. And the reason for that is when you look right here, this whole thing is only 23 lines long. And it looks like I'm missing an ending curly brace there. All right. 24 lines long. What is this saying? This should make sense to you by now. You will need to do something like this tomorrow on your test. Because what you are told to do is when you shrink it down to a mobile size, it should still look good. Does that make sense to everyone? All right. So by now, this should make sense. Again, this is a media query. Everything that has to change in here, navbar, flex items, and column. All right. Now, you may remember this. You may not remember this. All right. But this thing, display flex, means that you can now use Flexbox. Okay. To say flex direction column, the default for that is row, which means basically stack everything on the same line. Guess what? That's what we want originally, because we want on the left-hand side, we want it to say WeSoM, and on the right-hand side, we want those links. But eventually, we want the logo to be on its own line. All right? So that was what that's for. The height, if you notice in here, I used rems. I tried to get away from pixels. It would have worked fine with pixels. And again, what's 8 rem? 8 times 16 is 128. All right, so that's the same thing as 128 pixels. Padding, 1.25 rem. 1.25 times 16 is 20. So 1.25 rem is the same as 20 pixels. Again, if you want to do any conversions on these, just multiply them by 16. All right, that's unless you go and make some other changes and you change your default font size, which is 16 pixels. All right, so that was our nav bar. Our A tags, I changed around the padding a little bit. Okay, added some margin. When it's this small, it's kind of up to you. Whoops. Okay, I could have literally said right there, like 0.1825 or whatever it is, rem. Or I can say 3 pixels. It's not really that big a thing one way or the other. Many developers mix pixels, points, percentages, rems, ems, all right? But you really should get you're more comfortable using percentages and rems first, ems second, and finally points and pixels. Because remember, points and pixels are absolute measurements. Percentages, rems, and ems are relative measurements. All right? So these are the items that we're going to have in here, these flex items. And all we're saying is make them in a column or format. Okay? So in other words, instead of having me item 1, item 2, item 3, item 4, item 5, we want that would be in what? In a row format. We want them columns in the same row. All right. Then we've got here flex column, and flex grid column. You'll know what those mean. You'll understand what they mean when we get into this. But we're saying set our flex to 100%. Basically, take up all the room you can, for lack of better words. And again, the big thing on there, just so you're aware of this, and the reason I just took a second to show you that is, yeah, we're starting like this. But when you look here, what we want are these 3 things to stack individually on top of one another when we get to a smaller size. We don't want this on the same thing. We want these to both stack. And we want these. They already are. All right, so those will be fine. This already is. And this we want to stack. So in other words, when we make this small enough, you can see exactly what's happening there. That is the mobile kicking in at 768. You'll notice these are all on the same line. It doesn't look terrible. All right? But when we hit that magic point, that magic break point, there. Now it's moving back. Now it looks bad, so really I should have checked for that, and I didn't. Shame on me. But when I get to it there, now it looks good. But there's a little place in there that looks pretty bad. All right, so I might change that. So well, the easiest way to fix that, notice since there's 2 words, just make this founder and make that contact. That would fix it, to be honest with you. Right? That's kind of a hack because that's not really the way it should be fixed, but it's a down and dirty, simple little fix. All right. So what I'm going to do, I'd rather have you watch this. Don't type. I will send you the styles.css file. I will send that to you, okay? All right? I mean, I was thinking about this morning, and I don't know about you guys, but when I went to school, I was always, when I was taking really good notes, I was always a step behind because I'm writing like crazy, all right? And at that time, we were lucky to have something like a PowerPoint when I was going to school, okay? But the point is, a lot of times it'd just be a teacher up there just blathering for two or 3 hours in a class. And I'm sitting there writing like crazy, and a lot of times I'd ask the person next to me, what did he just say? What did she just say? All right? So I just want you to listen. Okay, so let's take a look first. Let's take a look at, I've got it up here already anyway. So let's look at the index.html file. And let's talk about what's changed, etc. in there. Then we will look at the styles.css file. All right? If we're done with this by, we'll take a break at 9. If we're done with this by 9:30 or so, great. And you got 2 hours today. Again, tomorrow, now a couple of you have already done this, but if you have not, by tomorrow, go ahead and make sure you give me another invite to your All Web Dev coursework, and hopefully you're going to have everything done, all the homework that's due. All right? Or as much as you've done. I want to be able to give you credit. So let's assume person X, I'm not going to name anybody in here, but person X has done absolutely no homework and no labs. So I go into their GitHub repository for their All Web Dev coursework, and it's totally empty. Then I'm going to put a 0 in the book for each one of those assignments. Now, if it turns out, let's just say it's Gabriel, and I know that his is there because he showed me yesterday, but let's just pretend for some reason, it looked like, and he comes in and he's all flustered, and I did all this stuff. Then just show it to me. That's all. All right? But there's a big difference now, and one of the reasons that we're using Git is there's a big difference for you saying, hey, I did it all. I got it done last week, and you show it to me, and it all says done 2 minutes ago, as opposed to put in there 10 days ago. Now I can kind of timestamp it, for lack of better words. All right? Okay, so we've got our regular tag. I kept the same stuff as before. In other words, I added the description, the same description we had, same keywords we had, and the title I did change to just WeSoM Flexbox. Again, there's only one page. We could have made it home. We could have made it anything. I put some comments in here. You didn't have to do this. But here was the link to Font Awesome. Here was the Google Fonts link. So again, notice I've got at the top of my spreadsheet, I have the import statement. If you put the import statement in your style sheet, you don't need to link to it here. If you link to it here, you don't need the import statement in your style sheet. You really shouldn't put them both in, one or the other. And actually, it probably would have been better off. I'm going to undo this. And where I've got it in the style sheet, I'll just remove it later. All right, so there it is. And you'll notice I added the Roboto, and I've got 400, 700, etc. I was just playing around with it. It's not a big thing one way or the other. Here were my style sheet links, and you'll notice now there are 3 of them. You already have 2 of these. You've already got the utilities, which we're going to look at next in just a minute. I will give you the styles, and you've already got the mobile. And again, remember with the mobile, remember when you're doing this on your test to put in something like this. Because, if you don't put that in, and you've got styles, and underneath it you've got mobile, it's going to overwrite everything in styles with what's in mobile. You don't want that. This says, hey, once my screen size reaches, when it's between 0 and 768, use this one. More than 768, use this one. And we're always going to use this one. That shouldn't be a big surprise to anybody by now. All right? Okay. So this isn't that different from what we did before. All right? Just so you know, because I just put some of this stuff in here just to show it to you. By now, and we haven't used them much, but I want you to get used to the difference between this tag and this tag. So between a div and a span. The biggest difference is a div tag is what's called block level, And a span tag is what's known as inline. What does that mean? That means that when you use a div, by default, there should be a blank line before it and a blank line after it. All right, you use it for things like paragraphs, etc. On the other hand, when you use a span, that's when you want to be able to change something in the middle of something without creating a new line. So that span here, what this is saying in English is everything that's in this span tag right here, which is the real estate sign and the word WeSoM, what I'm saying there is I want them to be the primary text color. And that's that blue that I showed you. And that's all that's saying. Hopefully that made some sense. So that said, I'm going to close this because we already went over this one. Sure, I can save that. And let's take a quick look at the utilities class. I don't want to spend much time on this. What you're going to notice when you look through here is this is used a lot. Text primary, and then this number, 027. That's the blue that's used, as I mentioned to you, in Bootstrap. This is the green that's used in Bootstrap. All right? So this is our button. So remember, anything, if we want to take a hyperlink and make it look like a button, that's what this is going to do. All right? It's going to make, give it a pointer, display it inline block, give me some padding. The color, the text color is going to be white by default. There'll be no border. There'll be a little bit of a radius. What is that radius? Basically, it's about 5%. Something like that. I don't remember what the percentage is. All right? This says when we hover over our button, we want to change the opacity, so we want it to be a little bit see-through-ish. Didn't have to do that, but just to show you that. Then notice, do you notice when you look right here? See where it says, background, and you've got the color right there? Everybody see that on line 25? Do you see how that's the same color as that one right there? Wouldn't it be nice if we could define it once and just use it as many times as we want to? That is not in your book, but that is something I'm going to teach you in the last couple weeks of the semester. All right? We are going to build at least a skeletal shell, we'll say, of what you will use for your portfolio. Okay? And I will just show you how to do it. Now, if you decide when you look at, I hate this, redo it yourself. I'll even show you some software that's out there that's more drag and drop that you can get for free. All right? All right. So what we're saying here, if you look at these, let me move that up a little, that we want a button that's a primary color or a background of a primary color. It's going to be blue, and the actual text color will be white. All right? Our secondary will be green and white. We'll have a dark one if we want to use it, which is almost black. It's a real dark gray and white. And we'll have a light one, all right, which is a light gray with a dark text. Plus what's in here, just so you know it, is there'll be an outline. And what is that? What does an outline mean? Well, if you look up on the screen right here, please, and you look on this, do you notice how this is the same color as the background? Okay, that's an outline button, and all we did was we added around it a border. Okay, if you don't like that, you could have changed that color. Could have made it whatever color, if you thought it should have been white with blue text or whatever, you could do that just by going in and making that change. That would be fine. All right, I'm going to jump back then into here. So, nothing big so far, and as we go down, here's our nav section. All right, and I was playing around with this. Don't worry about that class equal contain. I didn't even end up using it. But I was playing around with a bunch of stuff last night. Okay, and some of it I just left in. So I've got our home, our about, and our founder. This is different. These are not jumping to different pages. This says jump on the same page to a tag that says pound home. That's referred to as ID of home. That's referred to as an ID of about, an ID of our founder, an ID of referrals, and an ID of contact. What does that mean? Again, it's always here much easier to show you. So I'm going to go up to the top. Click Contact Us. Pretty obvious where we just went. All right, I can go back to Home. Go to Referrals. go back to home. Go to our founder, go back to home. And go to about, and go back to home. Again, hopefully that made sense to you, but it's a very fast way to jump around on a page. All right? And that's exactly what I was attempting to do right there. So again, the way that you do that, the way that you put a link within the page that you're in is that you say href equals #, and then give it, # meaning an ID, give it a name, and have that ID on the same page. So you'll notice that the first one was what? Home. So look what my body tag. Oops. ID equal home. That's telling it to jump right to the beginning. All right. All right, then we've got our content. So we've got a background picture in here. I thought I'd be cute here. So where I said sell, I put a $sign in there. But this was a little tagline. So I've got WeSoM, we sell only mansions and cater to the rich and famous. All right. Again, that's just something I made up. What you're going to find a lot of times is if you were to create a website for someone, they've got a logo already, they probably have a tagline already, etc. The chances are they're not going to hire you to think up a tagline for them. You know what I'm saying? Even if they're a new place. Because if it's a company, you probably don't know that much about the company. You might, but you probably don't. All right? So, notice here, href equal # about. So when I click about, that's where it's going to go. All right, class equal button, primary. And we put a chevron in here, which is that little greater than sign. All right, just another thing that you can put in there. If you don't like it, just remove it. Then everything, again, is inside of a main. So, in our about section that was near the top, notice the first thing that's in here. Div class equal flex items on line 60. All right, and above that, we've got ID equals about, class equal icons, BG light. Does this make sense to you? I'm asking. Please look on the screen. This is saying, for this section, this is the ID that's going to be involved in it, but we want to have both the icons class and the BG light class, both of them. Now it ran onto the next line just because of the size of the screen. All right. Then underneath that, we've got a thing called flex items. When you look at this, typically the way that you will set up your code when you are working with Flex is you'll have a div or something else, which is your Flex container. All the stuff that's inside of that container that you want to put in a column or in a row format, whatever, those are Flex items. So there's nothing magical about the name Flex items, but since they're going to be used as Flex items, it seemed to make sense to call them that. Okay? And you'll notice, what do we have? Section, and in there we've got a div, and in there we got a div, and in there we got a div. You're going to find that kind of thing a lot, because the more that you do this, and the more granular you are, and the more you break it down like that, the easier it's going to be when you add your CSS to individual components. All right? So this is going to be that home. This is the thing that's, that says your first home. So notice that 3 times. We've got here an icon, a div. Inside of the div, we've got an H3. Then we've got some text. Then we've got another div, an icon, another div, an H3, and some text. Finish the div. Then we got another div, an icon, a div, an H3, and some text. All right? And by now, that should make sense to you that that is this stuff right here. You'll notice for this stuff, we put a border radius on there. We set the border, we put it at 50%, so it's circular. And gave it a background. By default, it doesn't have that. By default, if I took that off, it would just be the white icons. They stuck out a little bit more like this. If you don't agree, you just change it. All right, but this is the kind of thing, quite often, if you're creating a website for someone, they're going to be looking for something like that. I don't know if you'd call it glitz or pizzazz or whatever. All right, so far we've gone through this, and I'll mention this later, but if you look, rather than changing the color when we highlight one of these, I just put a bottom border on there. See that? We could have reversed the color. I could have made it a different color. That's what we did last time. Remember, we had our thing was blue, but it was, to me, it was a little bit irritating to always see that real bright yellow on there. So I thought this was a little nicer. If you don't agree, you don't have to do it that way. All right. Also, I changed the background color of the nav. I made it light, and I gave it some opacity so you can see through it. All right, so here was the founder section. Class is founder. Notice ID our founder. That's because we wanted it to jump right there. All right. And we've got a row here. Inside of rows are columns. And we've got column 1 and column 2. This is that thing that was split into two. On the left-hand side, we've got the picture of the founder. On the right-hand side, a little bit of history of the firm, so to speak. All right, so that's what that particular thing in there is. Now again, this is done very bootstrappy, for lack of better words, because in Bootstrap, you use div class equal row all over the place, and then you end up using columns. Again, it'll make more sense when we go into using Bootstrap in a few weeks. All right, so that was the first one with a picture, and then we've got our founder, and that's the text. Right there. So that stuff, just so you know, that stuff was this. All right. I did have some problems centering some of this stuff. The H2 didn't want to center right here. The button didn't want to center right here. You can go through and take a look at what I did. Just so you know, too, that is the picture. I mean, it actually is offset like a little bit. Okay. And I played with that a little. There's different things that we probably could do for that. I could have made a background on there. I liked it better since this was blue with white. I got white here, and there's no text in it. But if I did, I could have put her name or whatever down there if we wanted to do that. Here again, you see that button with the outline, and this is centered. So hopefully all of that makes sense. And then quickly, because I'm gonna go till 5 after, then we're taking a break. But if I jump back here into utilities, here's the stuff I'm flexing. Display flex, text align center, justify content center. I don't know why that's in there twice, but it is. And height 100%. We want to make sure it's centered. All right, this might be confusing. This says any div inside of flex items. So I don't have to name all of them. So any div that happens to be in a flex item, all right, automatically give it 20 pixels of padding. And I guess I should have changed that one to 1.25 rem. Would have been better right there. So there's one I missed. And there might be others. All right. And then we've got our columns, which basically just says to do a reverse. It's not that big a thing. Remember, it just literally is reversing the order. Here's the direction. We're telling it to change to row. This flex wrap is pretty important. That says if you make it small enough, don't keep making my columns more and more and more and more and more little. When you get to a certain point, all right, then wrap. So put the thing on the next line. All right, then the individual columns, same kind of thing in here. Again, I think if you take some time and look at this, it'll probably make more sense to you. All right? And I thought, like I said, I thought of having us do this together, and I thought, you know what, it's going to be a cluster. It's 250 lines. Some of you type quickly, some of you don't. So I just thought I would just provide everything. So I will email this file to you during the break. It is 9. Let's take a break. Let's come back, please, at 9:15. All right, then heading back, because I don't want to spend too much more time on this. Again, as I told you, I had a little bit of problem centering some of the stuff in here, so that's why, like the button here is in its own class to center it, so you can take a look at that. Then we had the testimonial section. That's those two people that originally, if you remember, their images were humongous. All right? I tried to keep as much stuff as I could from the last one. Why? Because I didn't feel like typing. I never really feel like typing. But, I already had a bunch of it done. But I did change. Notice the ID here is referrals. That's that link that's on the top of the screen. All right? And the same stuff. Nothing in there changed. All right, so before we go over the contact, let's just look at the styles for them. Now, one thing, just so you see this, I want you to see this. If you look right here under the header where I put the showcase, this may be the first time you've seen this, although I think I've mentioned it before. See where it says 100 VH? That says by default when this comes up on the screen, that big picture that we saw, that mansion, that should take up the whole screen. All right, I wanted that because that's what it's showing. We sell only mansions. Boom. And a lot of times that's what you'll see in a single page application. It'll set the view height of whatever you have for your main image that's on the page. This literally, this actually, some people would call what I did a landing page. I guess you could. I look at a landing page typically as just the picture and the text and maybe links to other places. But sometimes this will be in one file, sometimes this will be in multiple files. How do you know? If you're doing it for somebody, you ask them what they want. Some people find it easier to just peruse their way down a page. That's what, for instance, my friend Tom, and originally we had this set up as 3 or 4 different pages on that leavemeathome.com site. He didn't want that. He wanted one big page. You know what? You want it. He didn't pay anything for us doing this, but you want it and you're doing it for somebody, they're paying you, you do whatever they want. I've done stuff for people before and I thought, hey, this is just really asinine. I don't say that to them, but I've thought it. All right. And then this was the content. Again, notice display flex, flex direction column, align item center, justify content center, text align center, height 100%. You're going to be doing a lot of the same stuff. As I mentioned to you, when we go through at the end of the semester in the last few weeks, all right, and we're going to come back and we're going to start building the portfolio kind of as a class. I'm going to show you what's called SAS, a CSS precompiler, where you, instead of always putting that in there, we can give this a name. Now, I wouldn't call it blue button, but I would say for the color, I would call it maybe like primary color. All right, that way if I want to change it later, I change it in one place, and it's not primary button, primary paragraph, no, it's just primary. All right, and if it's going to be a primary text, I might call it primary text color. If it's going to be primary background, I might call it primary background. Or some people call it like BG, primary, BG, or T for text, whatever. Again, sometimes you're going to go to work for a place and it's literally they're going to have their own standards. You just follow them. All right. Then here were these icons. Notice there's some padding around them. We made them bold. And this is where, if you remember, the border radius is 50%. That's where they're rounded. And the color, the background color rather, was set to green. You don't have to do things like that. All right, but a lot of times what you'll hear either online or if you take a class or in a book or is, you know what I want? I want my website to pop. And I'm not saying that this website pops, okay? Literally, I spent an hour or two on it last night, okay? But, it looks fine for what it is and what it's trying to show you, all right? And the icon's wide I ended up not using. I should have removed it. I was playing around with that. I didn't like it, so I just left it the way it was. The image, you may or may not have noticed the image of the woman. It's 70%. It's cut down so it doesn't take up that whole area. So we made it 70% for the width. All right, border radius to round it. Put some padding in there. Put some left margin in there. If you didn't, it was pushed way over to the left. That's one of those things. If you look at the actual site again, it doesn't look bad. It looks fairly centered. Again, I played with it a little bit. But when you look, not there, but when we make it real small like this, again, now it looks like it's a little bit too much. See what I'm saying? Those are the kind of intricate little things that as a web developer / designer, you have to be thinking about. All right? Because, or you can take the attitude, well, you know what? The person I made the website for didn't ask about it, so I'm not going to change it. Or you can just change it on your own. One thing to realize, I think I've already said this, but I'm going to keep saying stuff like this, is, you know, you go to work for somebody. Let's just say that you're a freelance person, so you're working, you know, you've hung out your own shingle, you're working on your own. Somebody's paying you $2,000 to create a website for them. And you agree on a set of requirements. There's 50 things you're supposed to do. And you've got 48, 49, you're up to number 50, and you're like, you know, they probably would have wanted this too. You know, because it just makes sense. If you go back and ask them, of course they're going to say yes. But now you're doing 51 things and being paid for 50. So that's a decision you have to make. And I'm not trying to be callous or anything here, but the point is, if you go back to them and they say, yeah, they want it, and you give it to them, even though it wasn't in the requirements, if it breaks later, you got to fix it. All right? Or you can say, I've got all 50 things done. You ought to start thinking about what you want in the next revision of this. Or do you want to spend, you know, $100 a month, and whenever you come up with questions or whatever, have me fix it. All right? Again, if you're working for a company and it's the company's website, that's pretty much a moot point. But just so you understand what's going on here. All right. So here was, again, the founder stuff. I did some centering. Like I said, I already told you that. Put in that padding class. H2, did a little bit of work. The color's white, the background's blue, and the text align is center. You should by now look at this stuff right here, and that should immediately spring to mind to you that that is what did this. That shouldn't be a surprise to anyone. All right, and again, typically on every page, you have one H1 tag. That's your main focal point of the page. This is an H2. You could take an H2 tag and make it bigger than your H1. But it's still, what I'm trying to teach you, one of the things is best practices. It's considered best practice to only have one per page. Remember, you can always change the size using CSS. So here were the testimonials. Again, I played with the height and width a little bit. All right, so I did a bunch of stuff in here. All righty. And notice that for the testimonials, that was the, so where are we here? We're down to here. And I used black for the color. Now, it might have helped to bold that. You might look at that and say, yeah, you should have put font weight bold. But remember, we also have some opacity here. So if I would have bolded it, the opacity wouldn't have shown through there as well. But, if you create this for someone, they might turn around and go, I like this, I hate the background. Boom. You just get rid of the background and it's gone. You want a color there, you replace it with a color. All right, you don't want it set up like this, you just make those changes accordingly. All right. So this was all the testimonial stuff. Notice here for the margin top, I actually put in a negative number. If I put in left margin, it tries to push it down. I'm sorry, if I put in top margin, it tries to push it down. Bottom margin tries to push it up. Make sense? Left margin tries to push it to the right. Right margin pushes it to the left. All right, but I put margin top negative because it already was in a good position. I wanted it to go up a little more than it was. All right, and here was the stuff for the contact form. Again, there's very little stuff that's in here. I used virtually everything that was in there before. All right, and I tried to purposely set it up like that. The footer, virtually the same thing as before. So when we go back and we look at this, again, the form, you're going to notice it looks virtually the same as it did before. All right, I changed the coloring, but other than that, there's not very much that changed in here. All right, and for the utilities, there was the section header, different sections that we did, and there's the flex stuff. I would say, again, if you say, well, we're having a test on this on Monday, I'm still really confused. My first question would be, did you watch that series by Mr. Gudmeston? It's probably going to take you 1 to 2 hours. All right. The advantage of putting something like that online is you can stop it, you can move back, etc. He knows what he's talking about. You might think that's a trivial example, and maybe it is. But it should really get you to where working with Flex makes sense. I gave you that Scrimba site today. You can look at that. You've got this in here right now. But I know a lot of times when you're sitting there and you're working, it's like, oh, geez, where's this? Where's this? So I'm giving you some sites. All right. You can feel free. I would rather have you do it if you have headphones, but otherwise, when you get home tonight, to watch any of that stuff. All right. Any questions on anything that we went over for this site? Did this help? Does it make a little bit more sense now? All right. So you've got basically the same website, done two different ways. All right. The first one with just setting it up with floats. This one setting it up with Flexbox. The test you'll have tomorrow will be floating. All right. We've already talked about that. The one that you will take next Monday, it's not the same test, but it's not that different. But it'll ask you to do it with Flexbox. All right. Last time. Any questions? All right. Then it is 9:30. The rest of the period is yours. As always, if you got to take a break, get up and take a break. All right.